It was a crisp autumn morning in the quiet town of Maplewood, where the streets were lined with golden leaves and the air carried the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the local cafe. Life in this idyllic town was usually predictable, with its tight-knit community and peaceful pace. For Matt and Jake, identical twins who had spent their entire lives being inseparable, it was just another day, or so they thought. The story begins with the two brothers sitting in the sterile, white-walled office of Dr. Emma Carter, a well-respected local physician known for her meticulous attention to detail. Matt leaned back in his chair, tapping his foot nervously against the linoleum floor, while Jake flipped through an old magazine, pretending to read but clearly distracted. The tension in the room was palpable. What had started as a casual curiosity about their ancestry and genetic predispositions had spiraled into something far more unsettling. A few weeks earlier, Matt and Jake had purchased a popular at-home DNA test kit. It was supposed to be fun, a chance to explore their roots and settle a long-standing family debate about whether they had Scandinavian heritage. Their parents, Steve and Linda, had even joked about the results over dinner, confident that nothing out of the ordinary would come to light. When the results arrived, they were both excited and perplexed. While they shared some overlapping genetic markers, the data revealed significant discrepancies in their ancestry composition. Jake's results indicated a strong Eastern European lineage, while Matt's leaned heavily toward Mediterranean heritage. It made no sense. The twins had been told their entire lives that they were identical, born just minutes apart in the same hospital. They had the same sandy blonde hair, the same sharp green eyes, and even the same childhood mole on their left cheeks. How could their DNA tell a different story? At first, they laughed it off, assuming it was a mistake. Maybe the test was defective, Jake had suggested. But curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to dig deeper. Their decision brought them to Dr. Carter's office for a more comprehensive medical analysis. Little did they know, this visit would mark the beginning of a journey that would turn their world upside down. Dr. Carter entered the room, holding a manila folder in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her usually warm demeanor was replaced by a look of concern. She adjusted her glasses and took a seat across from the twins, placing the folder carefully on the desk between them. "Matt, Jake," she began, her voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "I've reviewed the results from both your at-home DNA tests and the additional analyses we ran here at the clinic. There's something unusual." Matt sat up straighter, his nervous tapping coming to an abrupt halt. Jake set the magazine down and exchanged a glance with his brother. "Unusual how?" Jake asked, his voice steady but laced with unease. Dr. Carter sighed, choosing her words carefully. "The results indicate that you two are not genetically identical twins. In fact, based on the data, it's highly unlikely that you share the same biological parents." The room fell silent. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, almost too surreal to process. Matt blinked, as if trying to reset his brain. "Wait," he said slowly, "are you saying we're not actually brothers?" "I'm saying," Dr. Carter continued, her tone professional but compassionate, "that your DNA profile suggests a more complex situation. This goes beyond simple ancestry differences. I believe there may have been an error, possibly at birth." Jake's heart raced as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. "An error? Like, what kind of error?" Dr. Carter hesitated before responding. "It's possible you were switched at birth or that there was some mix-up in the hospital records. This isn't something I can confirm without further investigation, but given the inconsistencies in your genetic data, it's a real possibility." Matt's head was spinning. "But we were born in the same hospital. Our parents were there. How could something like this happen?" Dr. Carter leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Matt, Jake, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. If what the data suggests is true, there could be legal and ethical implications, not just for your family but for the hospital as well. I strongly recommend that you consult a lawyer." The twins were dumbfounded. This was supposed to be a routine visit, a harmless exploration of their genetic makeup. Now, they were being told to seek legal counsel for something that sounded more like the plot of a crime thriller than their real lives. Jake broke the silence. "Are you sure about this? I mean, is there any chance this is just a mistake?" Dr. Carter nodded sympathetically. "I understand how overwhelming this must be, and I don't want to jump to conclusions. But the data is clear. If you want to pursue this further, you'll need to involve a genetic counselor and possibly a legal expert to uncover the truth." The gravity of her words began to sink in. Matt felt a wave of nausea wash over him, while Jake clenched his fists, his mind racing through 100 different scenarios. What would this mean for their family? For their identities? The idea of their parents not being their biological parents was unthinkable. And if they weren't brothers, what were they? As they left the clinic, the world outside seemed unchanged. Cars hummed down the street, leaves danced in the wind, and people went about their day, blissfully unaware of the bombshell that had just been dropped. But for Matt and Jake, nothing would ever feel normal again. Walking in silence toward their car, Jake finally spoke. "So, what now? Do we just go home and pretend this didn't happen?" Matt shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No. We need answers. If there's even a chance this is true, we can't ignore it. But, how do we even begin?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, man. This isn't exactly something they prepare you for in life. Do we tell Mom and Dad? Do we call a lawyer? This could destroy everything." Matt hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on him. "We can't keep this a secret. They deserve to know. But let's figure out our next steps first. We need to be sure." As they drove home, their minds were flooded with questions. Was this just a mistake, or was there a darker truth lurking beneath the surface? And if it was true, what would it mean for their family, their identities, and the lives they had always known? The answers would take them down a path they never could have imagined, challenging everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world around them. The car ride back from the clinic was unusually quiet, the air thick with tension. Matt gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while Jake stared out the window, lost in thought. The usually scenic route through Maplewood, with its rows of picturesque houses and sprawling oak trees, felt oddly surreal. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. Their minds churned with a whirlwind of questions and fears, none of which they could vocalize just yet. Back home, the twins walked into their shared apartment, a cozy space filled with mementos from their lives together. Photos of family vacations adorned the walls, a shelf displayed their childhood trophies, and their matching bicycles leaned against the corner by the window. It was a sanctuary they had built over the years, a reflection of their bond as brothers. But now, every piece of their shared history felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. Jake collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "What the hell just happened, Matt? How did we go from figuring out if we're part Swedish to, whatever this is?" Matt sighed, sitting across from him at the dining table. "I don't know, man. I can't even wrap my head around it. How do we not share the same DNA? We've been told our whole lives that we're identical. Everyone always said we looked like carbon copies of each other." Jake lifted his head, his green eyes filled with confusion. "Do we tell Mom and Dad? Do we even tell anyone? What if this tears them apart?" Matt hesitated, weighing the gravity of their decision. "We have to tell them. But not yet. Let's figure out more about what we're dealing with first. If we go to them with half-baked information, it's just going to create more questions than answers." Jake nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But where do we even start? Are we supposed to just call a lawyer out of the blue and say, 'Hey, we think we might not be brothers'? Matt rubbed his temples, trying to focus. I think we start with the hospital. They're the only ones who can confirm if there was some kind of mix-up. If they did make a mistake, then we'll go from there. The twins spent the rest of the day poring over old family photo albums, searching for anything that might hint at a discrepancy. They studied pictures from their childhood, birthday parties, holidays, school events, but everything seemed normal. Their parents, Steve and Linda, had always been loving and attentive. They couldn't imagine them hiding such a monumental secret. Hours turned into days as Matt and Jake delved deeper into their quest for answers. They requested their birth records from Maplewood General Hospital, where they had been born 28 years earlier. The process was slow and bureaucratic, filled with endless paperwork and polite yet unhelpful responses from hospital staff. It was as if the institution was reluctant to acknowledge the possibility of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, the twins decided to conduct their own investigation into their family's history. They reached out to relatives, subtly asking questions about their early years. Do you remember anything unusual about when we were born? Jake asked their Aunt Susan during a phone call. Not really, Susan replied. I mean, your mom had a tough labor, but that's not unusual with twins. Why are you asking? Jake deflected with a laugh. Just doing some family research. You know, trying to piece together the full story. Their relatives' answers were always vague, offering no clues that could explain the genetic discrepancies. Frustrated but undeterred, Matt and Jake decided it was time to escalate their efforts. They scheduled an appointment with a genetic counselor, Dr. Karen Patel, who specialized in unraveling complex DNA cases. Dr. Patel's office was located in the city, a sharp contrast to the familiar streets of Maplewood. The building was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. The twins sat across from Dr. Patel, who was meticulously reviewing their genetic reports. Matt, Jake, she began, her voice calm and analytical, I've reviewed your DNA profiles, and there's no doubt that your results are highly unusual. The differences in your genetic markers are consistent with individuals who are not biologically related. However, what's particularly intriguing is the level of overlap in certain markers, which suggests some form of shared ancestry. Jake leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Shared ancestry? Like, distant relatives? Possibly, Dr. Patel replied. But the data also indicates the possibility of a more immediate connection. It's rare, but in cases of hospital mix-ups, we sometimes see evidence of partial biological links between individuals. This could mean that one of you is related to your parents, while the other is not. Matt felt a knot tighten in his stomach. So, what are you saying? That one of us might not actually belong in our family? Dr. Patel nodded gently. That's one possibility. But to confirm anything, we would need to conduct additional testing and gather more information from the hospital. Have you spoken with your parents about this yet? Matt and Jake exchanged a glance. Not yet, Matt admitted. We didn't want to tell them until we had more concrete answers. Dr. Patel gave them a sympathetic smile. I understand. But you should prepare yourselves for the possibility that this journey may lead to uncomfortable truths. The most important thing is to approach it with compassion and an open mind. Armed with this new information, the twins left the city with a mix of hope and trepidation. Their next step was to confront the hospital directly. They scheduled a meeting with Maplewood General's legal department, presenting their DNA results and requesting a full investigation into their birth records. The hospital's response was cautious but cooperative. A senior administrator, Mr. Charles Edwards, assured the twins that their concerns would be taken seriously. We have strict protocols for handling these kinds of inquiries, he explained. But I must warn you, these investigations can be complex and time-consuming. Over the next few weeks, the twins' lives were consumed by the investigation. They were inundated with questions from hospital staff, geneticists, and even lawyers. Every step forward seemed to reveal new layers of complexity, as if the truth were buried beneath decades of red tape and forgotten memories. One evening, as they were sorting through yet another batch of paperwork, Jake suddenly froze, his eyes locked on an old photograph he had found in a box of family mementos. "Matt," he said, his voice trembling, "look at this." Matt leaned over, peering at the faded photo. It was a picture of their parents holding two newborns in the hospital. But something about the image felt off. The wristbands on the baby's tiny wrists appeared different, one had a name clearly visible, while the other seemed to have been smudged or altered. "What the hell?" Matt muttered, his heart racing. Why would their wristbands look like that? Jake's mind raced with possibilities. Do you think this could be evidence of a mix-up? Maybe someone tried to cover it up. Their discovery added fuel to their determination. They brought the photograph to their lawyer, who agreed that it could be significant. "This might be the leverage we need to push the hospital for more transparency," the lawyer explained. As the investigation intensified, the twins began to notice subtle changes in their interactions with the community. Friends and neighbors who had once greeted them warmly now seemed cautious, as if the whispers of their unusual situation had spread. The twins felt like strangers in their own town, their identities unraveling with each passing day. Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's suspicious. Do we know why she left?" Karen shook her head. "Not yet. I've requested her personnel file, but it could take some time to obtain. In the meantime, I suggest we try to locate her and see if she's willing to talk." The twins agreed, and Karen began reaching out to her network of private investigators to track down Nurse Trent. While they waited for updates, Matt and Jake decided to visit their parents. They knew they couldn't keep this from them any longer, especially now that the investigation was pointing toward a potential error at the hospital. The drive to their childhood home was tense. Both brothers were lost in their thoughts, trying to anticipate how their parents would react. Steve and Linda had always been their rock, steady, dependable, and fiercely protective. The idea of shattering their world with this news was almost unbearable. When they arrived, Linda greeted them with her usual warmth, ushering them inside and offering coffee and freshly baked cookies. Steve sat in his recliner, reading the newspaper, but he put it aside when he saw the twins. "What brings you boys here on a weekday?" Steve asked, his voice light but curious. "Everything okay?" Matt and Jake exchanged a nervous glance before Matt cleared his throat. "Actually, we need to talk to you about something. It's serious." Linda's smile faded as she took a seat across from them. "What's going on?" "You're scaring me." Jake hesitated before diving in. "We've been looking into our DNA results. You know, from the test we did a while back. And, well, we found some things that don't make sense." Steve frowned. "What do you mean?" "Like what?" Matt took a deep breath. "Our DNA doesn't match the way it should if we were identical twins. And it doesn't fully match yours and Mom's either." The room fell silent. Linda's face paled, and Steve's brows furrowed in confusion. "What are you saying?" Steve asked, his voice tense. "We're saying," Jake continued, "that there's a chance we weren't biologically born into this family. There might have been a mix-up at the hospital." Linda's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You're our boys. I carried you for 9 months. I was there when you were born." "We know, Mom," Matt said quickly, his voice thick with emotion. "And nothing changes that. You'll always be our parents. But the DNA doesn't lie. We need to figure out what happened." Steve leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. "This doesn't make any sense. We've loved you both since the moment you came into this world. How could something like this have happened without us knowing?" Jake reached out to place a comforting hand on Linda's arm. We don't blame you for anything. This isn't about that. We just want to find the truth, for all of us. After a long, tearful conversation, Steve and Linda agreed to support the twins in their search for answers. They even offered to provide their own DNA samples for further testing, hoping to shed more light on the situation. Their unconditional love and willingness to help strengthened the twins' resolve, even as the road ahead seemed more daunting than ever. A few days later, Karen called with another update. Nurse Abigail Trent had been located in a neighboring state, living in a small retirement community. She had agreed to meet with the twins under the condition that their conversation remain confidential. The meeting took place in a modest coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Nurse Trent, now in her 70s, was a petite woman with kind eyes and a soft-spoken demeanor. She greeted Matt and Jake with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, clearly unsure of what to expect. "I remember that night," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was one of the most chaotic shifts I ever worked. The power outage threw everything into disarray, and we were understaffed to begin with. I was assigned to the neonatal unit, and I'll never forget how frantic it was." Matt leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Do you remember our case specifically?" Nurse Trent nodded. "I do. Your mother's delivery was complicated, and there were concerns about one of the babies. I was tasked with monitoring both of you, but during the power outage, things got confusing. I can't say for certain, but I've always wondered if something went wrong that night." Jake's heart sank. "Why didn't anyone say anything? Why didn't you report it?" "I tried," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "But the hospital administration was more concerned with protecting their reputation than addressing the issue. When I pushed for an internal review, they accused me of negligence and forced me to resign. I didn't have the resources to fight back." Her words confirmed the twins' worst fears. The hospital had known about the mix-up, or at least suspected it, and had chosen to bury the truth. Armed with this revelation, Matt and Jake knew they couldn't stop now. The answers they sought were finally within reach, but so were the consequences of exposing a decades-old mistake. As they left the coffee shop, the weight of what they had learned settled heavily on their shoulders. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, but it came with a price. For the first time, they truly understood that their quest wasn't just about their own identities, it was about justice, accountability, and the lives that had been irrevocably altered by a single night of chaos. The revelation from Nurse Abigail Trent was the most significant breakthrough yet in Matt and Jake's investigation. It confirmed their worst fears: a mix-up had likely occurred in the hospital the night they were born. As they drove back to Maplewood, the weight of the truth pressed heavily on their shoulders. The twins had always prided themselves on being strong and resilient, but the emotional toll of this journey was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Jake broke the silence as they neared their apartment. "So, what now? We've got a retired nurse admitting there might have been a mix-up, but how do we prove it? It's not like the hospital is going to hand us a confession on a silver platter." Matt gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set in determination. "We don't stop. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that persistence pays off. We'll take what Nurse Trent told us and push harder. The hospital knows something, and we're not letting them off the hook." Their next step was to meet with their lawyer, Karen Hughes, to strategize their approach. Karen was impressed with the information they had gathered from Nurse Trent, but she cautioned them about the challenges ahead. "The hospital has a lot to lose if this story gets out," Karen explained as she spread out a series of documents on her desk. "They'll fight tooth and nail to protect themselves. We need undeniable evidence, something that forces their hand. I've already filed a formal request for all records related to births during the time of the power outage, but I'm not optimistic they'll comply without a legal battle." Matt leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What about the other families? If there was a mix-up, it didn't just affect us. There could be other parents out there who took home the wrong baby. Maybe they've noticed something, too. Karen nodded thoughtfully. That's a good point. If we can find another family with similar concerns, it could strengthen our case. But locating them won't be easy. We'd need to cast a wide net, social media, local news, maybe even a public appeal. Jake hesitated, his voice uncertain. A public appeal? You mean putting our story out there for everyone to see? That sounds risky. What if people don't believe us? What if it backfires? Karen looked at him sympathetically. It's a gamble, no doubt. But sometimes, public pressure is the only way to force accountability. If you're willing to take that step, I can help you craft a statement that focuses on the facts and avoids sensationalism. After a long discussion, the twins agreed to go public. They filmed a heartfelt video in their living room, addressing the camera with raw honesty. They explained the discrepancies in their DNA tests, the power outage at the hospital, and the information they had uncovered so far. Their goal wasn't to accuse anyone but to find the truth and potentially reconnect with their biological families. The video was uploaded to a popular social media platform, accompanied by the caption, "What if everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? Help us uncover the truth." The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the video had gone viral, garnering thousands of views and comments. People from all over the country shared their own stories of medical mistakes, DNA surprises, and long-lost relatives. Some expressed outrage on behalf of the twins, calling for the hospital to be held accountable. Others were more skeptical, questioning the validity of their claims. Amid the flood of messages, a few stood out, parents who had given birth at Maplewood General around the same time and were willing to share their experiences. One message in particular caught their attention. It was from a woman named Sarah Dawson, who wrote, "I gave birth to a baby boy at Maplewood General the same week you were born. I've always wondered if something went wrong. My son, Alex, has never looked like me or my late husband. I'd be willing to talk if you think it could help." Matt and Jake reached out to Sarah immediately, arranging a meeting at her home. Sarah was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a nervous energy that mirrored their own. She greeted them warmly, inviting them into her modest but cozy living room. "I saw your video," Sarah began, clutching a mug of tea. "And it struck a chord. For years, I've had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Alex is a wonderful son, and I love him dearly, but he's always been different. People used to comment on how he didn't look like me or my husband. At first, I brushed it off, but as he got older, the differences became harder to ignore." Jake leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Do you remember anything unusual about your time at the hospital?" Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, actually. There was a lot of confusion that week. I remember the power outage, they moved us all around, and the staff seemed overwhelmed. When they brought Alex to me, I remember thinking he looked different. But I was exhausted, and the nurses assured me everything was fine. I never thought to question it after that." Matt exchanged a glance with Jake, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Would Alex be willing to take a DNA test? If there's a chance he and one of us were switched, that could be the proof we need." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn. "I'll talk to him. He's always been curious about our family history, so he might agree. But I don't want to upset him unnecessarily." Over the next few days, Sarah spoke with Alex, who agreed to the test. When the results came back, they were astonishing. Alex shared a significant amount of DNA with Linda and Steve, making it clear that he was their biological son. Matt and Jake were stunned. For years, Alex had lived with a family that wasn't biologically his, while they had been raised as twins despite having no direct genetic link. The revelation sent shockwaves through both families. Sarah was devastated but also relieved to finally have answers. Linda and Steve were heartbroken, grappling with the idea that one of their sons wasn't biologically theirs. Yet despite the emotional upheaval, all parties agreed that love, not biology, was what truly defined their families. The story quickly gained national attention, with news outlets picking up on the viral video and subsequent discoveries. Maplewood General Hospital came under intense scrutiny, facing public outrage and legal action from both families. Investigations revealed that the power outage had indeed caused a series of errors in the maternity ward, including the mislabeling of infants. The hospital issued a formal apology, promising to implement stricter protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. For Matt and Jake, the journey didn't end with the truth. Reconnecting with Alex and navigating their new reality was a complex and emotional process. Over time, they formed a bond with Sarah and Alex, creating an extended family that was unconventional but deeply supportive. The experience left an indelible mark on the entire community of Maplewood. The story sparked conversations about the importance of accountability in medical institutions, the impact of family dynamics, and the resilience of the human spirit. Matt and Jake's journey became a symbol of hope and perseverance, proving that even in the face of life-altering revelations, it's possible to find strength and connection. In the end, Matt and Jake stood together, united not by shared DNA but by the unbreakable bond they had built over a lifetime. Their story was a testament to the power of truth, the enduring nature of love, and the extraordinary ways in which life can unfold. The revelation of the truth had settled over the families like a storm that had finally passed, leaving in its wake a mixture of relief, confusion, and emotional wreckage. For Matt, Jake, Alex, and their respective parents, life had taken on a surreal quality. Every day seemed to bring new challenges, new conversations, and new attempts to navigate their suddenly altered relationships. It wasn't just the truth they had discovered, it was the fallout, the repercussions that rippled outward, touching every aspect of their lives. For Matt and Jake, their once unshakable bond was now laced with questions. Jake had always been the more laid-back of the two, content to let life unfold as it would, while Matt had a meticulous, almost stubborn drive to control his destiny. This difference in their personalities now seemed magnified in the wake of the discovery. Matt wanted answers about what had gone wrong, answers about who they were outside of the identities they had always claimed as their own. Jake, meanwhile, just wanted peace. "Do you ever wonder," Matt asked one evening as they sat on their apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling below, "who you'd be if this hadn't happened? If we'd just lived our lives without ever knowing?" Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the stars. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to go back to that ignorance. Yeah, it's complicated now, but at least we know the truth. I think there's power in that." Matt nodded, though his mind was still restless. The revelations had sparked something in him, a need to understand his identity on a deeper level. Who was he, if not the son of Steve and Linda, if not Jake's twin? The question gnawed at him, an itch he couldn't scratch. He decided to dig deeper, not just into the circumstances of their birth, but into who he truly was. Meanwhile, Jake found himself forming an unexpected bond with Alex. The two had met several times since the DNA test results came back, and while the initial meetings had been awkward and tentative, they soon discovered a surprising amount of common ground. They shared a love of hiking, a fascination with history, and even a quirky sense of humor that had them laughing uncontrollably during a coffee shop visit. "I feel like I've known you my whole life," Alex said during one of their outings, a hint of amazement in his voice. "It's weird, isn't it? How connected we feel even though we didn't grow up together." Jake smiled, clinking his coffee mug against Alex's. "Weird, but also kind of amazing. I guess it just goes to show that family isn't always about biology." For Linda and Steve, the revelations had forced them to confront a painful reality. They loved Matt and Jake with every fiber of their beings, but they now knew that one of them wasn't biologically theirs. It was a concept they struggled to process, even as they assured both sons that their love was unwavering. At the same time, they found themselves forming a connection with Alex, their biological child who had grown up in another family. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required patience, empathy, and an open heart. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Steve raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To the bonds we choose and the love that binds us, no matter what." The moment was poignant, a reminder that while the truth could be painful, it could also bring people closer together. The community of Maplewood, however, was not as forgiving. The story had spread like wildfire, making the twins and their families the subject of intense scrutiny. Whispers followed them wherever they went, and every outing felt like stepping onto a stage. Some people expressed sympathy, others were judgmental, and still others treated the situation like a juicy piece of gossip. At the local grocery store, Linda overheard two women discussing the family in hushed tones. "Can you imagine?" one of them said. "Raising a child for nearly 30 years and finding out they're not even yours? I don't know how she does it." Linda kept her head high, refusing to let the comments get to her. But inside, she felt the sting of their words. It was a stark reminder of how their private lives had become a public spectacle, something she had never wanted for her family. Matt and Jake, too, felt the weight of the town's judgment. Jake, ever the peacekeeper, tried to brush it off, but Matt found himself growing increasingly frustrated. "Why can't people just mind their own business?" he fumed one afternoon after overhearing yet another conversation about their situation. "Because people love drama," Jake replied with a shrug. "It's human nature. Just ignore them." But Matt couldn't ignore it. The scrutiny fueled his determination to bring the hospital to justice, not just for their family but for any others who might have been affected. The lawsuit against Maplewood General was gaining traction, with Karen Hughes leading the charge. The discovery of additional affected families bolstered their case, turning it into a class-action lawsuit that demanded accountability and systemic change. The legal battle was grueling, with the hospital's lawyers employing every tactic in the book to deflect blame. They argued that the power outage was an unforeseeable event, that the staff had acted in good faith, and that the records were too old to provide conclusive evidence of negligence. But Karen was relentless, piecing together a narrative that highlighted the hospital's failure to implement proper safeguards and their attempts to cover up the mistakes. The trial became a media sensation, drawing attention from national outlets. Reporters flocked to Maplewood, eager to cover the story of the twins who weren't twins, the families torn apart and brought together by a decades-old mistake. For Matt and Jake, it was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the publicity put pressure on the hospital to settle. On the other hand, it meant living under a microscope, their every move scrutinized by the public. As the trial progressed, Matt found himself grappling with a new challenge: forgiveness. He had spent so much time chasing the truth, so much energy demanding accountability, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it would mean to forgive. Could he forgive the hospital for their mistakes? Could he forgive the community for their judgment? Could he even forgive himself for the doubts he had harbored about his own identity? In the end, the lawsuit was settled in favor of the families. The hospital issued a public apology, agreeing to compensate the affected families and implement sweeping changes to their policies and procedures. For Matt and Jake, it was a bittersweet victory. The money and the apology couldn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it was a step toward closure. With the legal battle behind them, the twins turned their attention to healing. They continued to build their relationships with Alex and Sarah, creating a blended family that defied convention but thrived on love and understanding. They also found new ways to connect with their community, using their story to advocate for improved medical practices and greater accountability in healthcare. As time passed, the scars of the past began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and resilience. Matt and Jake had faced an unimaginable journey, one that tested their bond, their identities, and their faith in the world. But through it all, they had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more certain than ever that family was about more than DNA. It was about the love and support that carried them through even the darkest of times. The lawsuit may have concluded, and the public frenzy surrounding Matt and Jake's story may have waned, but for the twins and their newly extended family, the journey was far from over. Closure wasn't a singular moment or event, it was an ongoing process, a gradual piecing together of lives fractured by the revelation of the truth. For Matt, Jake, Alex, and their parents, the aftermath was a time of healing, reflection, and transformation. In the months following the settlement, life slowly began to settle into a new kind of normal. Matt and Jake remained inseparable, but the nature of their bond had evolved. They no longer thought of themselves as identical twins, a label that had defined them for nearly 3 decades. Instead, they embraced their roles as brothers in spirit, connected by shared experiences and a lifetime of love, even if their DNA told a different story. Their parents, Steve and Linda, also underwent profound changes. For years, they had prided themselves on their stable, picture-perfect family. Now, they had to confront a more complicated reality, one that forced them to redefine their identities as parents. Linda, in particular, found herself grappling with waves of guilt and doubt. She would often sit in the living room, flipping through old photo albums, her fingers lingering on pictures of Matt as a baby. One evening, as she stared at a picture of herself holding both boys in the hospital, Matt joined her on the couch. "Mom," he said softly, noticing the tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Linda sighed, her voice trembling. "I just keep wondering. How could I not have known? How could I have raised you and not realized that you weren't biologically ours?" Matt placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Because it didn't matter," he said firmly. "You loved me like your own because, to you, I was your own. DNA doesn't define what kind of mom you are. Your love did that." Linda smiled through her tears, hugging Matt tightly. It was moments like these that reminded her that family wasn't about perfection, it was about resilience, about choosing to love each other through life's challenges. Jake, meanwhile, found solace in his growing relationship with Alex. The two began spending more time together, discovering shared hobbies and building a friendship that felt both natural and surreal. Alex was curious about the life he might have had, the memories he had missed out on growing up in a different family. Jake, ever the optimist, focused on creating new memories instead of dwelling on the what-ifs. One weekend, Alex invited Jake to join him on a hiking trip, a tradition Alex had started with his late father. As they scaled the rugged trails of a nearby mountain, Alex opened up about his feelings. "You know," he said, pausing to catch his breath, "it's strange. Growing up, I always felt like something was missing, like I didn't quite belong. But now that I know the truth, I feel complete. Like I've found a part of myself I didn't know I was looking for." Jake nodded, leaning on his hiking pole. "I get that. For me, it's the opposite. I've always felt like I belonged, but now I realize that belonging isn't about where you came from, it's about who's there for you." The hike ended with the two brothers standing at the summit, looking out over the sprawling landscape below. For Alex, it was a moment of clarity, a realization that his identity wasn't tied to a single family or history, but to the connections he chose to nurture moving forward. While the twins and their parents were navigating their new realities, Sarah was also finding her place in the unfolding story. She had spent years as a single mother, raising Alex with love and dedication, but now she was learning to share him with another family. It wasn't easy. The Dawsons and the Carters came from different worlds, with different traditions and ways of life. But over time, they found common ground, united by their shared love for their children. Holidays became a new adventure. Instead of separate celebrations, the two families decided to combine their traditions. Thanksgiving dinners were lively affairs, with Matt and Jake cracking jokes, Alex sharing stories from his travels, and Sarah and Linda bonding over their mutual love of cooking. It wasn't always smooth, there were moments of tension, of misunderstandings, but the effort to come together was always worth it. As time passed, Matt began to channel his experiences into something larger. The legal battle had ignited a passion in him for advocacy, and he decided to use his story as a platform to raise awareness about medical accountability and the importance of patient rights. He started a blog, sharing his journey and encouraging others who had experienced similar situations to come forward. The blog quickly gained traction, attracting a community of readers who found solace and inspiration in Matt's words. He began giving talks at medical conferences, collaborating with organizations that work to improve hospital protocols and prevent errors like the ones that had affected his family. For Matt, it was a way to turn his pain into purpose, to ensure that no other family would have to endure what they had. Jake, on the other hand, found his calling in the world of mentorship. Inspired by his bond with Alex, he began volunteering at a local youth center, working with kids who were navigating their own challenges with identity and belonging. His easygoing nature and sense of humor made him a favorite among the teens, many of whom saw him as a role model. One day, as Jake was helping a group of kids paint a mural, one of them asked, "Why do you do this? You could be doing anything, but you're here with us." Jake smiled, his hand streaked with paint. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost," he said. "And I know how much it helps to have someone remind you that you're not alone." For Alex, the journey was one of self-discovery. He had always been curious about his roots, but now he felt a deeper connection to his identity. He began researching his ancestry, piecing together the stories of his heritage and sharing them with both families. It was his way of bridging the gaps, of celebrating the rich tapestry of lives that had come together in such an unexpected way. As the years went by, the families settled into their new normal. The initial shock of the revelations faded, replaced by a sense of acceptance and growth. They had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and more united than ever. One evening, as the families gathered around a bonfire in Sarah's backyard, Matt raised a toast. "To family," he said, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you build, the kind that stands by you no matter what." The group raised their glasses, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that while life was unpredictable, it was also full of beauty and connection. For Matt, Jake, Alex, and their families, the journey had been anything but easy. But in the end, it had brought them closer together, teaching them that family wasn't about perfection or biology, it was about love, resilience, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. Their story was a testament to the power of unity, a reminder that even in the face of the unexpected, it was possible to find strength, hope, and a new kind of belonging.